Beans. Apologies for not being quite as elaborate with my clothing and makeup as I usually am. I'm kind of tired, but I wanted to do this quick little video because last night my best friend, my arch friend Ash took me to London, and we went and saw the Soulless Ones, which is the first play produced by Hammer Films, as in Hammer Horror Films, Hammer House of Horror, whatever you want to call them. And it was fabulous. Unfortunately, we saw it quite late in the run, so it's only running for another week, I think. It's been extended up to the 4th of November. So I wanted to do this video as quickly as I could to sort of review it, and hopefully some people might decide to go and see it because it was really good, and I feel like we should support these nice people who are doing a nice thing. The Soulless Ones is a sort of immersive theatre experience, which is something I've heard of, but I've never experienced before, and it was really, really well done. It's performed in Hoxton Hall in Islington, which is, well, it was originally a Victorian music hall, and is now used for a variety of different performances. So the core of the Soulless Ones, the play, is performed within the music hall. It's the actual music hall bit with the chairs and the stage and that. But if you want to, you can then follow the actors around the entire building. They've pretty much taken over most of the building from the cellar right the way up to the sort of little gantry bit at the top. And the actors will just, wander through the house for 2 hours doing their thing, and you can follow whoever you want. And that was really cool. It gave it a lot more of a real feeling and a sort of three-dimensionalness. Three-dimensionality? I can't wait. So the very beginning of the play is everything is happening in the music hall, and the very end is pretty much the same. You can, if you want to, especially if you're disabled or whatever, or just less mobile, or just don't fancy wandering about, you can just sit there and experience the story just from that one room, or wander about. We basically spent the whole thing flitting between characters. What they suggest you do is find a character you like and follow them. The trouble was, we liked all of the characters. I don't think there was a single character that I didn't find interesting, so we basically just sort of followed each of them around, and just sort of, oh, I wonder what they're doing now. Oh, it's him again. What is he doing now? And sort of weaving backwards and forwards. It involved a lot of running up and down stairs, so I was quite tired, and hence me not bothering dressing up today because I'm sleepy. But so I suppose I'd better talk about the plot. That might help a little bit. And because it is such a it's immersive rather than interactive, so you don't talk to the actors at all, you don't touch them, and they basically pretend you're not there for the most part. There's a cute little conceit at the very beginning where they give everybody who walks through the door oops, sorry, that was my phone, a sort of very cheap black velvet cloak, and then you wear that for the whole thing, and the idea is that the scary things can't see you when you're wearing this cloak, you're safe. And it's also a good way to sort of make it very obvious for both audience and actors who is who. I mean, I'm assuming the actors know who each other are, they work together, but you know what I mean. It makes it a lot easier for the audience to differentiate other audience members from the cast. Plot-wise and sort of conceit-wise, this is basically everything I love from Hammer. It really felt like a callback to the days of, Scars of Dracula, Vampire Lovers. I'm a big Hammer nerd, and so this was very exciting. The story is about Camilla, as in Camilla Karnstein, the famous vampire lady, and her hive of vampires. And it sort of starts off as a sort of vaguely Victorian era occultist gentleman coming in, breezing in with his briefcase, also leather doctor's bag, and starts sort of setting things up for a ritual. And this is supposed to be some sort of occult event that he's doing as a sort of... He's basically a Van Helsing type. He's very sort of academic and doctorish, but also, very clearly involved in what he's doing. And at this point we're introduced to some other human characters. There is a doctor chap who's supposedly a skeptic, but obviously he clearly wants for the supernatural to be real. There's a poet who is looking for his inspiration, and there is a fortune teller, oracle type lady. She's a psychic. That's the word, psychic. So they're all introduced, and this Van Helsing equivalent chap does a ritual, and then behind him we see the vampires turn up. The vampires, there are quite a few of, actually. There's a fabulous imposing black guy named Cassian who has the most fabulous sort of late 17th century frock coat. There's another slightly older black guy, I think his name was Billy or something like that. There's two sort of 18th century fop types called Ambrose and Aubrey, who call each other brother all the time. They're like, oh brother, oh yes, my brother. But they're like super gay, which is glorious. They're so camp and hilarious and slightly sinister, but also a little bit dim. And then there's various fabulous lady vampires. There's a young one named Elodie who is very newly turned and she hasn't fed yet. There is Mara, who is a lot older and very sort of authoritative and severe and stern, and she seems to have some sort of prophetic ability. There's Laura, who has the best dress. I love the dress. All the costumes actually in the entire play were gorgeous, especially in the sort of low light, and you could get quite close to them and see all the details on the backs, and I'll talk a bit more about the clothes in a bit. And then of course there's Camilla, who she was so just regal and imposing and glorious, and her whole costume was stunningly beautiful. And then there is there's a few more. There's one more vampire, I think. There's a vampire monk named Brother Gorgo, who's very sort of penitent and worried and concerned, and is rather picked on by some of the other vampires. And then there's one more human who is basically like the Renfield equivalent. His name is Dimmy, and he's quite animalistic. He sort of clings onto things and scurries around. He's quite clearly insane and quite tortured, but pretending, sort of blanking all of that out. And he really wants to be a vampire, but the vampires don't want him to be a vampire. They're basically just using him as a snack bar. And beyond that, I won't spoil much of the plot. We were a little bit worried when it started that we might miss some important plot details. I don't know how they managed to do it writing-wise, but we never really lost the plot. And there are points where you sort of skip from one character to another, and then you hear like a revelation about something that they were just saying a minute ago, and like, oh, okay. And the whole thing just unraveled in such an organic feeling way, which was really, really nice. And the dialogue is fun, and it has that same sort of timeless Hammer feel. That one of the things I always loved about the sort of the core Hammer films from the late 50s up until mid to late 70s was that sort of timeless placelessness that is simultaneously incredibly British, like very, very British, but also sort of pan-European. The way that everyone has a British accent, but it's never really clear what country you're in. Aside from, oh, this town is called Carlsbad, but we don't know where Carlsbad is. That sort of thing, and that sort of... It might be Victorian, it might be Edwardian, it might be somewhere earlier, and I always loved that about Hammer. I love that slightly, that very sort of gothic fairy tale feel, and this had a similar sort of thing. I mean, there are hints at what time period we might be in, but it doesn't really matter, which I quite liked. I mean, I think it's supposed to be Victorian-ish, 19th century-ish, but there's also certain costume elements that hint to being a bit later, so there are also lines about time working differently there, so and there's some really interesting sort of hints of something bigger and darker. Without spoiling too much, there's some wonderful dialogue about the voices in the walls and what the voices are, and they're slowly turning some of the humans mad, and the vampires don't like them, but they kind of don't acknowledge them, and that is sort of, I don't know, deliciously creepy. In terms of the sort of staging and the whole immersive experience, one of the things that just fascinated me was they had managed to make the different rooms in the house smell different, and the way that managed to sort of affect the atmosphere was just incredible. So there's a bit of sort of the cellar where they have some the dormant coffins of vampires who have been slain by hunters, I suppose. And there's sort of earth and ferns and that sort of business. But it smelt damp and earthy down there. And then there was another room that was sort of the vampire den, that was basically like an opium den with the sort of mattresses strewn around and drapes, and the whole thing, that whole area smelt of opium and incense. There's slightly dry, dusty smell in some of the other places, and all of the corridors and the stairwells were just decked out with one or two little bits and pieces just to make sure that it never felt like you were leaving that world. There would be sort of alchemical symbols drawn on the walls, or dead roses, or bits of lights that flickered, and there were some rooms where there was just almost constant voices whispering, but obviously they were on a recording, which was, in terms of tone and sort of spookiness level, I suppose, it reminds me very much of the old Hammer. It's spooky and atmospheric and gothic without being, modern jump scary, unlike some of the newer Hammer films. I like quite a few of the new Hammer. I'll talk about that at some point. It never sort of made me jump, but there were moments that were sort of, ooh, that's nicely sinister sort of thing. So yeah, I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it, and if you can get tickets, they're not cheap, but given the nature of the performance I can kind of understand it. It's running, I think they said until the 4th of November now, so that's 4 extra days that you can go and see it. And you know, if you're looking for something to do in London and you've got some spare cash lying around, I recommend it. So do that. I will be back very soon because I'm full of stuff that I need to catch you up on and talk about and that sort of business. Anyway, bye bye.